Welcome to the Wellness Rebel Show, where you reclaim your health and tap into your body's healing power. I'm your host, Fatima, here to empower you with the knowledge and tools to take charge of your well-being. Whether you want to boost energy, improve mindset, or unlock vitality, this is your go-to source for practical advice and inspiration. It's time to step into your power and live a life of health and freedom. Welcome to the revolution. Welcome back to the Wellness Rebel Show. Today I have Justine. She's going to share all about her health journey, and I'm very excited to learn more about it. Welcome, Justine.
Thank you, Fatima. It's so great to be here.
All right, let's start off by telling us about your journey and, like what you went through and how you got here.
Yeah, it's been quite long. I think, as with many of us, it starts just in childhood. I was never healthy. From infancy, I didn't sleep well. I was colicky. I had a tongue tie that was never addressed, and now I'm working through the airway stuff. Constant stomach pain, constant headaches. Very, very, very shy. Couldn't make friends, and I was depressed. I didn't know it, but I didn't really ever experience happiness. And I was always stressed about things. And there was some dysfunction, I think, nervous system dysfunction going on in my family with my parents that I was definitely feeding off of. But I also definitely had heavy metal toxicity from the beginning, congenitally. And I think I was depleted just from a line of people who didn't eat enough.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on. And I was just never happy, never healthy. And that just kind of continued, and I never really knew that there were answers. I didn't know it wasn't normal to have headaches every single day as a child, or stomach aches, be constantly bloated and gassy and just uncomfortable all the time.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 17, I got really bad cystic acne and then started the antibiotics train and birth control. And I was on that for 5 years until it stopped working at the end of college. I was going into grad school and my skin just started breaking out like crazy. And I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm just done. And I started researching nutrition stuff and kind of ended up in the Weston A. Price sort of paleo world. And it just has kind of flowed ever since then. So I quit those medications cold turkey for the acne that I had been on. And I'm blessed that I was never on antidepressants, even though I probably definitely could have been on a lot more medication than I was. And I'm very grateful that I was not. So that made it a little easier because I didn't have to taper anything.
Yeah.
But immediately noticed just with changing nutrition, wow, I'm sleeping better. I had insomnia my whole life. And now all of a sudden I'm sleeping better. I'm less bloated. My headaches are getting better. And I'm feeling more confident, which was so mind-blowing to me to kind of see the way that I was engaging with the world start to shift and with people around me, and just feeling more comfortable in myself. And it was amazing. And then, so things were just kind of generally getting better. My skin was getting better too. And I was so happy to not be tied to going to a doctor's office and getting more drugs. And so it was great. And I think some of what I was feeling was also just coming off of antibiotics and birth control. After being on them for 5 years, I was experiencing side effects that I didn't even realize were side effects because I had been on them for so long. So there was a lot happening at once. And then I started a postgraduate work and was required to get a Tdap. And so that happened in 2016. And I fainted that week. I got really, really sick, like fever, couldn't eat. And it was pretty bad. But I didn't connect it to the Tdap at that time. I didn't make the connection, even though I was very anti taking medication. I hadn't really researched that train of thinking yet. But I started putting things together and my health really just started falling apart. And I was still trying to control food. And so I was still like, okay, I must have more food sensitivities that I need to eliminate. Because here I am thinking like, I eliminated gluten and things got so much better. So I was just taking away foods, down to AIP. Then I did the GAPS diet and just was getting worse and worse and worse. And I did the GAPS diet without really knowing anything about histamine sensitivity or thiol sensitivity. And thiols are a type of sulfur. And so I was eating broth and soups with tons of garlic and onion and eggs and sauerkraut, which are all high thiol foods, not knowing what was going on. and things are getting worse. I'm getting these extreme panic attacks. It was like barely able to get out of bed. I had really extreme back pain and headaches. My skin's breaking out. I stopped being able to eat solid food. And it was pretty extreme. And so this morning I finally said, okay, I'll see a functional medicine doctor, but I'm not going to see a regular doctor. Yeah. So I went into a functional medicine doctor, and of course, had to pay this year-long membership to see her and do all the lab testing. And, look, I have autoimmunity and hypothyroid and SIBO and, all the things. So she puts me on this slew of supplements. I'm on a thyroid medication and still getting worse. And so 4 months into that, I look like a zombie. I have like all of the life sucked out of me. I'm barely functioning and just like, I have no idea what's going on. And just still like at this point, eating AIP without, I had tried the Walls protocol as well. And I was not doing well with all the vegetables, but I hadn't made that connection yet. Eventually made the connection to the sulfurous foods causing issues. So I was like, okay, I have to take all these sulfurs out. Started making the connection to histamine. Like, okay, I need to go lower histamine. So here I am from AIP, eliminating high histamine and high sulfur foods. It's like left with nothing.
Yeah.
And like, okay, where do I go from here, and what's causing this? Like, why can't I eat healthy foods like broccoli and onion and all these things? And it wasn't like I was just getting gut responses. I was getting severe anxiety and a lot of mental symptoms that would come out of them, as well as insomnia and restlessness, like restless in my body. So it was quite extreme. It wasn't just like, oh, my gut feels a little off. It was a full body, full system response. And I kept looking into like, okay, what causes sulfur sensitivity? Okay, maybe it's sulfur SIBO. So I did a treatment for sulfur SIBO, and I felt better for like 1 week. It was like not really working. And then I'm like, okay, well, maybe I just need to stop eating altogether and maybe it'll get better. And so I did the elemental diet, which is basically just like amino acid powder, honey, and olive oil. It was absolutely disgusting. And I'm just like dwindling down and down and down. And just like, I don't even know what's going on. And so I laugh now, but it was not funny at the time. So then eventually I kept running into mercury toxicity as a cause for sulfur sensitivity. And I still was like, oh, well, why would I have mercury toxicity? Like, I've never eaten a lot of fish. Like, why would I have that? And that's when I started going down the whole vaccine rabbit trail, kind of falling more into understanding a little bit more about heavy metal toxicity and really how common it is. And so it turns out that when I had started the functional medicine, the supplements that my practitioner doctor had given me were redistributing mercury around my body. And so that's why I had gotten so much worse. And also that's why I had the thiol sensitivity that was actually redistributing the mercury. And then the histamine was, I think it was a mast cell issue going on because there was just so much going on at once. So I started getting some answers, but I still didn't know what to do about it, because every time I looked into how to detox heavy metals, it was like, eat sulfurous foods and take NAC and glutathione and all these things. I was like, no, that didn't work. That was a disaster. So I don't know what to do. I ended up finding the Andy Cutler protocol, which is a chelation protocol, but it's low dose alpha lipoic acid. You take it every 3 hours, and they actually explain the thiol sensitivity, which is the first time I really heard anyone explaining this to me. And mine was so extreme, I couldn't have any garlic powder. Like, I couldn't get a sausage because it had, or like any prepared meat, because they don't have garlic and onion powder in them. So I'm like strictly eating meat that I cook at home and low thiol vegetables. And I couldn't really tolerate carbs at the time either. So that was where I was. So I started the chelation. And it was very clear, like from the very first round of that I was on the right track, because I responded very, very strongly. And so with that protocol, you take the chelator for 3 days, and then you take 3 days off, and that's a round. And I ended up doing, I can't remember, it's like 150 or 175 rounds of that over 5 years. The first 3 years, it was pretty much every week, like 3 days on, 3 days off, 3 days on, 3 days off. That's what I was doing. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, and mentally and physically, and the mentally so much harder than physically. Like, I think we can tolerate a lot of pain, but when you feel like you're losing control of your mind, that's a very different experience. And that's kind of what I was going through with these rounds. And it was like kind of almost being like dunked in and out of water of like this tank of ice of like, I'm losing my mind, but I know that I'm losing my mind. And I know that this metal is causing this and I can't really control it, but at least I know why it's happening. And so that was pretty much 2 years of that. And then the third year, things started getting a little easier. And then the fourth and fifth year, it was like I had never experienced health in that way before, specifically mental health, physical as well. But it was like I was a different person. And I still kind of look back to that time before I did the chelation, and all of those memories feel different to me because I was in such a negative headspace 24/7 all the time. That is now extremely different. I was so much in my head, so paranoid, frustrated, angry, just very, very negative. And now I'm not. It's like this night and day difference. And it's just wild to me. So I've always kind of known, well, since that time, that heavy metals are such a huge issue. But I didn't really know what to do about it as far as other people are concerned, because most people cannot do that protocol because it's like I mentioned, it's absolutely brutal. I was not married at the time and didn't have kids, so I had no one depending on me. I was in a situation where I could set aside my life to do this. And I really did. And I was a freelance musician at the time, so I could work just a few hours in a day and make enough money to survive. And that worked because I wasn't in a 9-to-5 situation where that wouldn't have worked either because I didn't have the energy for that. So it was a blessing, but it was definitely the most difficult thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I also don't regret doing it. Then, as I came out of that and I became more aware and started looking into nervous system and emotional stuff and more understanding nourishment, really not from a food restriction and like eliminating, but more from like what can I bring in, and kind of seeing more pieces of how my life was really impacting everything, and just seeing much more of a big picture thing of what was going on. And that's been so freeing and just amazing. I have no food sensitivities anymore. I can eat anything I want. So to go from like this many foods to I can have total freedom has been just absolutely amazing, and just so much fun to just make food and not have to worry about it. And then I learned about mineral balancing. It was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And it's so much gentler than what I did. And it's nourishing at the same time rather than just stripping. And so then, I was hooked since I learned to kind of understood more of the mineral balancing. So that's what I do now. I'm still mineral balancing myself and my husband, my parents. I'm pregnant. So
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And my clients. So it's been really, really amazing to have this much gentler, nourishing way to address the metals.
Yeah. What a journey. Wow. I didn't know that. Well, I know that chelation is very hard on the body. And maybe, that's how probably why you went through that, and how lucky that, I mean, not lucky, but I mean, like you did it before you had kids. It's kind of like a blessing almost, right? Like at least you were able to deal with it, although it feels like it was very hard.
For sure. Yeah. A lot of people struggle a lot more or get a lot worse. And I feel very blessed that I made it through.
Yeah.
It wasn't fun at all while I was doing it, but.
So did you ever find out what, well, you said that it's like a birth inheritance, the mercury toxicity. Do you think that was the only reason why you had mercury toxicity, or do you feel like there were other like exposures that you had throughout your life?
So vaccines for sure. I was born in the early 90s, so had all the thimerosal vaccines. And then probably some processed food. We didn't have a ton of junk food growing up. My mom was pretty careful about sugar. Not that we ate well by any means. We were not eating real foods, but we also was like, it was the regular Cheerios, not the Honey Nut. And, that kind of healthy. So, and not a ton of soda, which I know high fructose corn syrup can be a source for sure. I think a lot was congenital And then I think, honestly, my nervous system was really, really affected by the dynamic in my family. And that really, so we don't detox well when we're in a stressed state. And that stress state can be caused by toxicity. It can be caused by depletion and not having enough minerals. And it can be caused by emotional triggers and nervous systems of those around us. And as children, we're very, very attuned to our parents. And so my parents were unknowingly in a chronic stress state all the time, and I could not handle that. And that's a lot of, I think, what was going on that prevented me from being able to detox. So every time I had more exposure, it was just adding to this burden that was already there. And I think had the emotional environment in my family been more supportive, it would have probably been a pretty different outcome.
That's right. So on your first hair tissue mineral analysis, I'm curious, were you very depleted probably from that chelation, or did it show a different picture?
Not as much as I thought I would be. I mean, it definitely was by no means a perfect test, but it was not nearly as bad as I thought it would have been. But it was a year or two removed from when I had really stopped actively chelating, and I had been able to eat more and really had changed my way of living and worked on slowing down. And so there were a lot of, there's always so many factors.
Yeah, yeah. And was that, I know that you said it was like 2 years after, right? 1 to 2 years after. Did your mercury level still like show high in your initial test, or was it just showing a poor eliminator and then still continued removing mercury?
Yeah, it was still poor eliminator, and I've removed more since mineral balancing, which was kind of mind blowing to me. Like, wow. But I have had quite a few people switch from Andy Cutler chelation to mineral balancing specifically. And it's really interesting that most of them, even if they were actively doing chelation rounds, and then we do a hair test for mineral balancing, they're usually very poor eliminator or poor eliminator of mercury when they start mineral balancing, and we actually see their mercury levels rise in the hair test, showing more excretion from mineral balancing than we were seeing from chelation, which has been just really fascinating to me, because in the Andy Cutler world, there's this narrative that mineral balancing would never actually be effective for detoxing metals.
That's interesting. Now, for those clients that switch from the chelation, Andy Cutler's chelation to mineral balancing, were a lot of them depleted? I'm curious about that because
Yeah, they look, honestly, everyone's tests are depleted, right?
Yeah.
I can't say that they look any worse than anyone else's tests. Like everyone's depleted. If I see a normal looking test, I'm like, whoa.
Right. I mean, maybe how about, do you have a lot of clients that are in four lows?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Because I know that it doesn't, chelation doesn't discriminate between essential minerals and metals. So I imagine that a lot of the essential minerals are also getting excreted. Now I'm wondering though if it's getting excreted through just the urine, but that's why you
Well, I
don't
think
see in the hair, or
it would depend on which chelator you're using. So a
okay.
lot of the mineral balancing understanding of chelation is the D chelators like DMPS and DMSA, which are used somewhat in Andy Cutler chelation, but I would say most people are using alpha lipoic acid, which actually most people don't even know that's a chelator. Like in the normal world, people just know alpha lipoic acid as a blood sugar stabilizer and an antioxidant, and they have no idea that it actually metabolizes into a chelator in the body. And I don't think that there's as much data on ALA specifically depleting minerals as there is on the D chelators. And I didn't really use a lot of the D chelators either. So that may be some of what's going on. But they're definitely, I think, pretty much across the board, they all feel better doing mineral balancing than they do doing the chelation. And we see their metal levels rising as they do the mineral balancing too in their hair test. So it's just really fascinating to see, like, wow, it actually looks like you're detoxing more. At least we're seeing more come out through the hair, but at the same time, you don't feel as crappy as you did on the chelation.
Right? Yeah, I know. I can just imagine like doing a harsh chelation compared to mineral balancing, which is really more gentle and, like you said, more nourishing because we're adding in, the necessary nutrients as well as foods. So I know that you said that a lot of your clients mostly find like resonated with you and reached out to you because of mercury toxicity. Are most of them like getting their mercury toxicity from high fish consumption, you
Most of
think?
them
Or
not. I've had a
okay.
few, and I do know a few people who know that that is definitely a cause, but most of them, it's really this slow accumulation through life. And honestly, I think the congenital thing is huge because a lot of people just assume because I had mercury toxicity that I had mercury amalgam fillings, which I actually
Mhm.
never did, but my mom did and my grandma did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what's getting passed down to from one generation to the next, I think, is one of the biggest factors in what we're seeing. And that's become really clear to me since doing a lot of hair tests on mothers and children and seeing very similar hair tests between a mom and a child. Like maybe both are in four lows, and four lows is the most depleted pattern that we can find. And when you see a 2-year-old in a four lows pattern, it's like, wow. But what's fascinating is mom will have her metals won't be showing very much on her hair test, and the child's more actively detoxing, and we'll see really high levels of metals on the child's test. And this child, has been alive for 2 years. Most of them are not vaccinated. They're generally eating pretty well. Like there's not a ton of exposure going on for this child. So the only real explanation is inheritance.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that they say the best detox for women is getting pregnant and having a baby. It sounds terrible, but it is true because we pass on everything, like our minerals and our toxicity, to our children. And I feel like the oldest one is probably going to have I think the first one will have the worst burden of the toxins, but then the more kids you have, the more depleted those kids are because we're more depleted the more kids we have. Right.
Totally.
Crazy.
Yep. Yeah, I was the first child, the toxic one.
Okay, okay. I'm number 4, but I don't know. I didn't discover mineral balancing until 2021, so I was already, you know, like lived my whole toxic lifestyle and all that stuff. So we would never know. But that's the beauty of the hair test though, because it kind of gives us like sort of like a short history, kind of like of what we did back in the day, and then you retrace the things that you did. Have you gone through a retracing reaction that's really extreme?
Not with mineral balancing. I think I did so much during chelation, and I definitely retraced things during chelation that from mineral balancing for me has been pretty easy. I mean, I'll get a headache every once in a while or some brain fog, irritable, but not anything really extreme. Sometimes memories will pop up. Like the other night I had some dreams from from some stuff from my teenage years and was like, clearly that's not resolved and my body's bringing that
Yeah.
up to work on now. But during the chelation, and I didn't know what was going on. Like intellectually, I didn't know what was going on, but I was having memories come up and old emotions, and it was like all kind of washing over me. And I do think that this is one of the reasons that I had success with chelation was even though I didn't intellectually know what was going on, I let it happen and I didn't resist it. And I let myself kind of work through what was coming up as it came up. So I did a lot of that work in especially those first 3 years of the chelation. And then I learned about retracing as I started studying mineral balancing, and I was like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what that is.
Yeah. So when your clients have experiencing retracing, what usually are your strategies to deal with that?
But I mean, backing off the program while they're working through it, but also, I mean, if it's something emotional, like acknowledging it and sitting with it and sitting with what's coming up, not pushing it back down because it's coming up for a reason. It's coming up to be worked on. So supporting the body, maybe doing some journaling, movement, I find to be really helpful. Rest and just trying not to avoid it and distract, but live through it and acknowledge it. And I think a lot of our emotions and our experiences, we hold on to them if we didn't allow ourselves to kind of give ourselves permission to experience them. So giving yourself permission to re-experience it. And I think of like having a conversation with your body. And if your body brings something up, it wants to be heard. And so if you just kind of tell like, oh no, that's not a big deal, or that was fine, you're just kind of shutting it down. It's like, oh, and then just like if you're having a conversation with a person. So having that conversation with your body and allowing it to speak and be heard and say, yeah, that was real, that was hard, I'm so sorry. And after that, then you can say, okay, now but we can bring some context to the situation and know why that happened or why it's okay now. But the listening to what happened is the key first part. And if you don't do that, then you can't really like logic your way out of it. Even if it's something that seems irrational, you have to let it out first, and then you can rationalize.
Yeah, I know. So I feel like so many times we hold on to those, well, not necessarily hold on to them. We kind of try not to deal with them. But I feel like that's also because we're depleted and you just don't have the energy to deal with it, right? I used to avoid fights with my partner because I'm just like, I'm so tired. Without really realizing that I was tired. I didn't even care to admit that I was tired. And then I started mineral balancing. And I told Clark, oh, I picked a fight with my husband because I have more energy to deal with it. So, you also, like, I know copper, right? Copper is kind of a big thing. Do you see a lot of your clients have either like hidden copper or like showing copper toxicity?
It's honestly, well, seeing it come out in the hair test, it seems to be one that starts a little bit, but it's rare to have adults do a massive dump. I have one who has elevated copper and always has, but for the most part, it's more hidden. And then what's fascinating is the kids. So, you have mom and then you have her two kids, and the two kids they start out with elevated copper, they start mineral balancing, and they dump like, copper shoots up to 11 or something.
Yeah.
And mom's still like, 0.8. It's like, well, it's gonna come out eventually. We know it's there because your kids have it. But yeah, the kids, I think, are the really tell what mom has, which is so interesting.
Yeah. I'm gonna pause this real quick.
Okay.
He just woke up. All right. So basically, I know back in the day they were telling us, right, or they thought that the placenta was just a carrier of nutrients to the baby, but not passing on the toxins, which we obviously now know is not the truth, right? Like that EWG study that they did. I know it was just 10 babies and they tested their umbilical cords and it had like 200 plus toxins, right?
Yeah.
So would you recommend, well, obviously you're doing mineral balancing right now, but because I had apprehensions before, like doing mineral balancing while pregnant, right? So what do you usually say to someone who's pregnant and they're apprehensive to do mineral balancing because they're scared of the detox and then the toxins passing on to the baby?
Well, I never want to force someone to do something that they're not comfortable with. So what I would say from my perspective, having been a child born into toxicity, is there are so many factors that come into play as far as our health that go beyond just the toxicity. And having the minerals on board is so protected. So if you have an already toxic and you're depleted, and you have a baby born with both toxicity and depletion, that's problematic. That's more problematic. And if you are stressed and your nervous system is haywire because you're depleted, that's also not good for your baby. So if you can do something that is providing more nutrients for your baby, as well as supporting your body and your nervous system so that you are in a better place to be a present mom who has capacity and energy to help your child, then in my mind, that's super supportive. I was similar, like when I first learned about mineral balancing and I heard that people did it during pregnancy, I was like, what? Because especially I had this chelation mindset of like, whoa, you never touch anything while you're doing it. And then Then I started seeing these kids' hair tests, and I was like, wow, these kids are so toxic regardless. No matter what we do, they're going to be toxic. So, what I want to do is have the most resilient child that I can.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the more depleted the mom is, then the more nutrients your kid has, and then the better their ability to deal with the toxins that they're getting. How about, I know this is also controversial, about doing a detox while you're breastfeeding, right? Like a lot of moms are always like, oh, don't detox while you're breastfeeding. But to me, maybe you agree also, like mineral balancing is really a very gentle detox. Do you think that we're also dumping a lot of our toxins through our breast milk?
It's possible, but what I've seen with moms who are pregnant and nursing and going through mineral balancing is they rarely have big dumps of metals,
Yeah.
because with mineral balancing, our body's going to use those nutrients for the first priority. And if we're growing a baby, detoxing is not the first priority. So the dumping doesn't seem to happen as much in those contexts. And I've also had a lot of moms who are nursing report that their nursing child does better, starts sleeping better, has less anxiety, maybe cries less, and
Yeah.
it just is generally happier when mom started mineral balancing.
Amazing. Is this going to be your first baby, like a mineral balancing baby?
Yep,
Yeah.
my first first
Yeah.
first.
I This one's my first mineral balancing baby too. So we're gonna have to take notes and see the difference, right? Like the colicness and like the sleeping through the night. So
Yeah,
you agree?
I don't have any
Go
other
ahead.
kids, so
Oh, okay.
I don't have a
Oh,
comparison.
okay.
All I have is a mineral balancing baby.
Amazing. Well, that's amazing because I want to share it real quickly too. Before I found out I was pregnant, because I was in denial that I was pregnant, I was like, no, I'm in perimenopause. It's fine. It's normal to skip 2 periods. I did a retest. And then when my test came back, I was so upset that it was telling me, the pattern was building up pattern. And then I didn't have much movement of heavy metals. And I was kind of like upset. I'm like, what the heck? And then I found out I was pregnant and then it clicked, right? I'm like, oh, because my body knew it was growing a baby. So it was conserving the minerals instead of using it up for pushing out heavy metals. So that's very fascinating how intelligent our bodies are,
Yeah, yeah, baby takes the nutrients first, so there isn't much left for detoxing.
right? See, it's amazing. Like, we can just be like, yeah, you can mineral balance while you're breastfeeding, right?
Well,
Because your
I mean,
body isn't very intelligent.
right, you're not taking a chelator, you're not taking something to pull, you're just giving
Yeah.
your body the energy to be able to do what it wants to do or what it needs to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever recommend or use binders while on mineral balancing? Or,
I actually love Pectisol.
okay.
Modified citrus pectin. It's supposedly does not bind to minerals and does help with excretion of metals, and it's specifically shown with lead. But I do find
Yeah.
that when clients are experiencing a dump, that they Pectisol often does help.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've been thinking about adding Pectisol to my protocol, but I just haven't. Because I also heard that it's really great for grabbing onto mold as well. Have you heard that?
Yeah, yeah, it's very supportive just in general and seems to be quite gentle. I've had just a couple of people who didn't tolerate it very well, but everyone else has done really well with it.
Yeah. Are you using that for now while you're pregnant or no?
So, from a binding perspective, I liked the idea, but I was listening to an interview with the creator of Pectisol, and there's other properties to Pectisol, like galactin 3 and some other things. And he said, really, we don't know how that affects the baby. So, I decided to take a very conservative approach. And if I do feel like I'm dumping something, or we just moved into a new house and there was mold and we were remediating and I knew that I had some exposure, I did take some in that context as well, but I'm not doing it on a regular basis, and I'm doing much lower than the normal serving size, which is actually quite large. And I
Yeah.
find that most of my clients do really well even with a lower dosage. Not that the higher dosage is a problem, it's just expensive to take that much
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. I can imagine. So, all right, I'm gonna keep that in mind too. Pectisol. I've been really looking into that because I have a lot of clients who are, who've been exposed to mold and whatnot. So, as a practitioner, do you ever recommend any other tests, or or are you like good with the things that you find in a hair tissue mineral analysis?
Generally, I love the HTMA. I don't, as a practitioner, I don't really do other tests because I mean, I did that integrative health practitioner training, which supposedly trains you for lab tests. But I know that the training, I know you're an IHP as well. The training we got for HTMA was woefully lacking and inaccurate. So I just kind of operate under the assumption that the rest of the lab tests probably similar. And so I have not pursued a lot of training in those other areas.
Yeah.
If there's a case where I think someone might need that, I'll typically refer them out to somebody else to do that because I don't feel like I have the tool base to really be able to do that a good service. And I don't want to charge for a lab that we can't really effectively use. But
Yeah.
I also, I mean, I was even resistant to mineral balancing and HTMA at first because I did a lot of other HTMA trainings. Like besides IHP, I did several others before like actual mineral balancing. And I found it to be so surface level and basic. And it was like, add beef liver and adrenal cocktails. And oh, this looks like you're stressed. It's like, oh, well, I think I knew that. Like, so
Right.
it seemed like just a waste of money. And that's kind of been and that was my experience with functional medicine was I spent thousands of dollars and did not get anything out of it other than diagnoses that I could, tell people, oh, I have this thing, but
Yeah.
it didn't actually help me get better at all. So in general, I'm more resistant to just labs in general. And I think there's so much in people's lives. Like if the HTMA is not enough or we're not seeing progress with mineral balancing, I'm more inclined to look at what else is going on in their life than more lab testing.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm curious. I'm going to ask you later, off the record, maybe what other mineral balancing or courses you took. 'Cause I also took several. I took several before I did the IHP, and then after IHP, I took another one that was really expensive. And then I was just still like, nope, this is not the one. But yeah, I love that though. I've been very resistant as well, like with the functional lab test, because yeah, it will just kind of give us the data, like, okay, your progesterone is low, your estrogen is low, let's say if it's hormones. But that's really all the information we're getting. We're not really seeing what's really going on. Why are they out of balance, right? And a lot of other practitioners that I've talked to also had the same experience. They've spent thousands and thousands, some even like hundreds of thousands in functional labs and like working with functional practitioners and really getting nowhere. Like so when you found out about true mineral balancing, how did you get convinced to take like do the hair test and like okay, I'm going to try this even though I'm kind of like resistant to functional labs?
It was reading the Context Energy interview with Dr. Paul Eck. And I think that really
Okay.
kind of like, okay, this makes sense. And it fit with the way that I view health in general, as far as like I was always still looking for what's further upstream of root cause. And like for example, when I first started looking into functional medicine back when I was really struggling, and that back then, this was like 2016, 2017, it was like, SIBO is the root cause. It's always SIBO.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
always the gut. And then it was also like SIBO recurs. And once you have SIBO, it comes back. And I was like, okay, A and B are not they're not adding up. If it's a root cause, it doesn't come back if you
Right.
address it. And so that kind of from that point on, I was always like, okay, what's deeper? What's deeper? And the heavy metals, like that was so powerful to me. But I was still questioning why are some of us so much more vulnerable to the metals than others? And why did I get so sick when my exposure was really smaller than a lot of people? I actually had less overall vaccines. I never had a flu shot in my life.
Yeah.
And I never had amalgams. And my husband he's a little younger than I am, and he's had more vaccines. He had 2 amalgams and he wasn't sick. And he did have some mercury toxicity, and we had his amalgams removed and he detoxed as well. But it was like, just worlds different from my experience. So then I just kept coming back to, okay, but why? Like, why
Yeah.
am I so much more vulnerable? And that gets to something much, much deeper than you can find with labs.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever use, because I know that, with mineral balancing, it's also a great tool for nervous system regulation, but have you or do you use any other modalities to help someone or even yourself with nervous system regulation?
For sure, yeah. So depending on the person, if they are up for watching videos, then something like Primal Trust can be really helpful. But I find a lot of people don't want to look at a screen anymore, and myself included. I find body work to be really helpful. It's like craniosacral fascial therapy, myofascial therapy, gentle movement, just things that really kind of bring you back into your body, as well as working through and processing emotions. And then that often just looks like awareness in the moment, journaling, just kind of as things come up, working through them, as well as assessing what your life looks like. So if you're trying to regulate your nervous system, and let's say you're doing something like Primal Trust or Gupta or something, some sort of, meditation or like regulation tools, but then your life is just utter chaos and you've scheduled yourself to the max. So it's like, okay, we're kind of missing the forest through the trees here. So
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
really truly looking at your life and how you're engaging with life and what you're consuming as far as information and screen time and all of this, like that's nervous system regulation. Is just like, get yourself outside, stop feeding into a fear cycle, whether it's something about the news or politics or COVID or whatever.
yeah,
So it'll depend on the person. And I love working one-on-one because just talking with someone, you can kind of get a sense for what's going on and maybe what would be supportive. And it's not always the same for different people.
yeah, yeah. Now, what have you ever encountered difficult clients where, like they're doing the mineral balancing and they're not seeing improvements, but it's also because they're not even trying to change the lifestyle that's causing the stress, the constant
Absolutely.
stress in them.
Yeah, I think it's a meme that goes around, like you can't out supplement like a bad lifestyle, and it's so true. As powerful as mineral balancing is, it's not a cure all, and it's not going to fix those really deeply rooted issues.
Yeah, and then a lot of times too, it's funny to me. Sorry, it's funny to me when, they're like not making the necessary lifestyle changes. And then they think that if they did another kind of test and a different protocol, like I'm just going to go ahead and do a gut test and maybe deal with my gut health, then they think that it will, all of a sudden be the magical cure, but not changing the lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. A lot. It's hard though sometimes, and so I feel like that those times it's just like you're just gonna have to fire a client at that point.
Yeah, and maybe it's just not the time right now.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, I know having difficult clients is hard because we want to help everybody, right?
Yeah. I've been thinking lately about if you're healing to try to go back to a life that you hate, it's like it's not going to work.
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're losing energy, you're burning out, and you're trying to get back energy to jump back into a life that's actually out of alignment, or you just don't, maybe you have no boundaries, people pleasing, overworking,
yeah,
your body is actually telling you something. And if you're just trying to supplement and do lab tests and functional medicine your way, it's not going to work.
yeah, yeah. It's like trying to push a big boulder up the hill. It reminds me of that video that I saw, like a deer was stuck in a ditch and the guy tried got it out and then it still went back into the ditch. Oh my gosh. All right. Sorry. Trying to think what else. Do you want to like share anything else?
I mean, my own personal story with that is, so I was a classical musician. That lifestyle is, I mean, while I was sick, I was able to kind of like keep treading water enough to keep going without overworking myself. But once I had enough energy to kind of jump back into it, it's a lifestyle where you're teaching lessons in the morning, you have a rehearsal in the afternoon, you have a concert at night, and then you go home. And for me, I was playing oboe, which we have to make our reeds. So then I'm making reeds. So it's just like nonstop working. You always feel guilty if you're not practicing. It's just an incredibly competitive, cutthroat environment where your whole identity is kind of wrapped up in your performance. So if you don't do well, if you don't do well in an audition, you don't get called for a gig, it's like, it's so personal. And it's a very, very toxic, emotionally toxic and physically toxic environment because you're just going. And I think one of the reasons that my healing was actually so successful is because I came out of the worst of it at the beginning of 2020. And that's when things really started to turn around. And so it was like February, March of 2020, where I was like kind of coming out of this cave that I had been in from the chelation. And then the world shut down.
Yeah.
And then orchestras mandated the COVID vaccine, which I did not get. And so I was pushed out of this career that had been my dream and I had been aspiring for. And I had kind of put on the back burner while I was taking care of my health for years. And I was so excited to jump back into it. I thought I was. And then I couldn't. And it felt like it had been taken from me. And that was hard, but it actually was the best thing because it forced me out of that environment. And then my healing like really took off because I had to completely redesign my life. And it was a huge blessing. And I still miss it, but I also know like we moved across the country. I live in the middle of nowhere now and I love it. And that was never available to me as a musician because you have to be in a city. I've never been a city person. So I was kind of misaligned there. And it was circumstances outside of my control that forced that. But it was such a huge blessing. Like, it was like God knew what was going on and like put me where I needed to be. I just didn't know that. And so I do have a lot of sympathy and empathy for people who are maybe their life circumstances don't physically push them out of where they need to leave, which definitely makes it harder. But at some point, you kind of have to realize this is a big issue and I can't out supplement this pattern that I'm engaging in. And even as I left and I was forced out of this environment that really kind of pushes you into this mindset of overworking 24/7, I brought that I started my business and, started really like, okay, I want to work with clients. And I just brought that into my business. And when you're self-employed, as you know, you can work, as much as you want. And I've really had to kind of evolve and really work hard at unlearning this like self-value rooted in productivity, which is such a lie. And that's been so healing, but so challenging for me. And probably honestly, one of the harder parts of healing is just kind of unlearning this. I need to be productive in order to have any self-worth.
Yeah. I love that. That is so true though. A lot of times we think that we have to be so busy and our calendars filled with activities, especially if, with the kids and all that stuff. And then you forget that that's like keeping you almost stuck in like that stress loop pattern. And then things go downhill from there. Not my kids, but my kid goes to ballet and a lot of her classmates do like, oh, we just came from soccer and then after ballet we're gonna go to Girl Scouts, and I'm like, how do you guys do it? But I guess it's different for them because they live like right there and they're so close, and we have to drive 45 minutes to my kids ballet which is kind of a lot. So we're like, okay, we're not gonna do all these activities because not only like, if you imagine if as a parent you're like stressed out about it, like how much more your kids, right?
Right. And what is that teaching them? That you need to schedule your day. Like, not only is it stressing them out and keeping them running constantly, but that's programming their sense of self into this is how I need to operate. And they're going to carry that unless they actively work on it. They're going to carry that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And that's what I really had to unlearn. And my parents actually, they did a great job as far as that's concerned. They didn't have us, and it was the 90s too, it was a different time, but they didn't have us running around like crazy. But my dad was like with his own career and his own work. And so even though I was not forced to be that way, that was the example that I saw in my parents. And so that's what I kind of ingrained as far as what I needed to do. And so it's been a lot of really conscious unlearning. And so I'm very cognizant of that going into parenthood. I don't want to set that example for my children.
Yeah. definitely good for your body to slow down. And that's one thing actually that I have some clients, right? Like they're low energy. I kind of tell them, hey, sometimes in the beginning, you're going to feel more tired, right? Before you really get back that energy because that's what your body needs. And they're so scared of that thing happening because then you dig deeper, right? And then they're like, "Oh yeah, when I was little, I my someone told me like if they see me sitting down that I was lazy," right? Like that's really like embedded programming. I had one client who was in slow ox, and then, I'm like, "Are you stressed out?" She's like, "No." Like, she doesn't think she was stressed out. I was like, "Listen, sit down with this from a place of no judgment and really like reflect with what's going on like in your life." And then eventually she came back to me and she's like, "You know what? I am stressed, but not like in that kind of like busy lifestyle kind of stress." But it was like she grew up, with that thinking where if you're sitting down and you're trying to relax and you're not being productive, that you're lazy. So she could never sit down and relax. So that's really one piece, right? That's another piece of the puzzle for healing is learning to slow down and just listening to your body and giving it what it needs.
Totally. I've thought a lot about this inherited blueprint that we're getting as far as we're starting more depleted and more toxic, which means we're going to need more rest. So we have this societal expectation of previous generations that we're starting with more physical energy and we have less physical energy, and we're trying to keep up with this standard that our bodies literally can't keep up with because it's just a different conversation now. And I think that's where a lot of this is coming from is the previous generations they weren't this depleted, so it was easier for them to go and to not rest. And now we're paying the consequences for them not resting, but because that did deplete them. And so it's just, we kind of have to look at the full picture of the conversation. And it's not saying to be lazy all the time, but to see like how are all these pieces fitting together, and where is my body and what does it need right now, and honestly what is most productive, because rest might be the most productive thing that you could do.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes you have to slow down before you can speed up. All right, well, I can't think of anything else right now, so I'd like to ask you if you can share like a favorite mantra for healing, or like like a little golden nugget, for anyone who's trying to heal or like in the trenches of their healing journey.
I think coming back to your whole life picture would be just kind of sitting with the question of what is getting in the way of my healing. Like, what is truly getting in the way of my healing? What do I really need? And I don't mean a supplement.
Yeah.
Just like really like what is heavy right now? What can be changed? And what in my life is causing this weight that's maybe preventing my body from being able to do that physical healing work?
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Justine. I hope that everyone that's working with you find the healing that they're looking for. And congratulations again. When are you
Thank
due?
you. Early April.
Okay. Nice.
What about you?
I'm due end of February, early March. We'll see.
Yeah. Just, you never know.
Right? Yeah, it's plus minus 2 weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Until next time. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please click the subscribe button. Share it with others, post about it in social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me or suggest topics, you can follow me on Instagram at Fatima Pagtakan or at The Wellness Rebel Show. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.